I'm Shelagh Rogers, and I'm sitting here in my den at home on Gabriola Island. And I'm looking for and about to have some very good company. We've got a series of Chancellor chats where I get to speak to some of my friends and some of the people connected with UVic. I'm very lucky as Chancellor. If I need to know something, I can just call a professor, a member of faculty. Students have taught me a great deal. But today I'm really delighted that I am talking to a professor emerita, a distinguished professor, and a really dear friend, and that's Lorna Crozier. And Lorna Crozier joins me now from her home. Lorna, so nice to see
Hi,
you. How
Sheila.
are you?
I'm great
How's it
now that I can
going?
see you. Oh my
It
gosh, how's it
helps.
going? It helps that I have a very big yard and garden, and it is
Mm.
pulling on me all the time to weed and cut the lawn and deadhead and feed the fish and feed the turtles. So I feel quite lucky that I didn't sell out and move into a 12th floor apartment somewhere. I can always
Oh,
wander
yeah.
outside and get involved.
I have to admit, I feel very fortunate too because there are a lot of really great places to walk and just to kind of get grounded at this very strange, someone called it a science fiction movie of a time. And
I'm glad
I
it
also
happened this
heard
time
from
of
a,
year.
yeah,
Sorry,
sorry,
Sheila.
Lorna.
I'm glad
Yeah.
it happened this time of year that our isolation took place
Oh,
in the spring rather than in the middle of winter when it would have been harder for us to get outside.
yeah. I heard last week, I was in a meeting, and one of the people in the meeting is a professor from the School of Business, Sudhir Nair, and we kept calling this time a bump in the road. And he said, folks, it's probably not a bump in the road, it probably is the road. So we have to figure out how to walk on it. And I think he may have a very good point.
Do you remember old Anglo-Saxon kennings, which were kind of noun combination metaphor? They're things I've always loved. And the ocean was called the whale road. And maybe that
Mm.
road is better off because of what's happening to our species, because we have had to calm down and cancel travel. Apparently, the whales are
Yes.
now more able to hear each other singing. So we've made their road better by having some bumps in ours. And I try to think of those bright spots that we're treating the world more kindly because we're not polluting it as much and we're being more quiet. And perhaps we'll learn from this that the things that are happening that are letting us hear more birds than ever before, and letting the whales hear each other. Maybe we'll keep those good things
Hmm.
going when this is all over.
I think about that too because I'm very fortunate I get to see the ocean every day and I see how much quieter the traffic is. The other thing that we're seeing from where we live are mountains that we've never seen before, which is incredible. But I love thinking about how much quieter it must be under the surface for all the creatures that are there. And just to bring in you, Vic, again, one of our entities, Oceans Network Canada, is always interested in what the sound is like under the surface, and I'm sure they're going to have some really interesting data for us as time goes by. But as you talk about hearing, you mentioned really hearing words, and I have so many friends who were, and I'm just going to say it, kind of afraid of poetry. And now, what are they reading?
Poetry?
They're reading poetry. You got it. Yeah.
And do they
Yeah,
tell you
people are
why?
turning to poetry. Well,
Hmm.
I think partly because I'm not going to lie, the form is short and attention spans might not be what they used to be. But I think also people are finding a grounding and some kind of instruction for observation. And I think a kind of slowing down. as well. That's what I'm hearing from my friends who feared it before.
Yeah, I get very frustrated by this fear of poetry. And unfortunately, I think it might have to do with the way it was taught in the school system,
Mm,
that a lot of teachers who present it to their students also have a fear of it. And they think that they need a special code to be able to understand it. Whenever I get notes from emails from high school students and university students who tell me that they have to present my poem to their class. And the first question they ask me is, what does it mean? Can you tell me what it means?
mm,
And I say, no, no, I can't. Asking what a poem means is like asking, what does a chicken mean? What does a foot mean? What does a cat mean? What
yeah.
does a chair mean? You bring yourself to the poem, you open yourself to what it is, what it's saying, and the poem will open up to you. And I think maybe the reason people are attracted to poetry in times of great joy and in times of crisis, like weddings and funerals, to summarize it, is because poems show us what it's like to be here and to be here now. They're sensual instruments. They deal with what we taste, touch, see, hear, smell. And so they bring us right into the moment. But the best of poems also send a taproot down to something deep and primal. The taproot touches an underwater stream that flows underneath everything and connects all of us. And we don't always acknowledge that it's there. But a poem brings that kind of dark, cold water to the surface at the same time that it says, and this is where your feet are in your own garden, in your own bedroom, in your own kitchen. And it does both of these things at the same time. And I think human beings need that. We need the
Mm.
transitory and we need the eternal. And I don't know that any small package does that, achieves that as well as a poem does.
I think that's really interesting, and I think about a book that the poet Adam Saul wrote called "How a Poem Moves," and he said the question, and you're right, the question should not be what does this mean, but the question should be, according to Adam, what does this poem do?
And it also shouldn't be, what is the answer to the meaning? What is the meaning of life? Poem doesn't provide us with answers. What Rilke, the German poet, said is that what a poem should do is shine the light on the questions. And so a
Yeah.
poem that
Oh wow.
leaves you in wonder, a poem that leaves you thinking, a poem that leaves you asking your own questions is a successful poem. It shouldn't tell you how to live, but it should tell you what to ask so that you can live a life that's more full and enriching for you. And I think it also, if it has any kind of message, it's to remind us to pay attention to the snail we see crawling across the stone and the kind of transparent trail that it leaves behind that is lit up by the sunlight. It should tell us to look at the way light bends around the corner of the stove in the kitchen, the way that fish rise, goldfish in the pond rise to the touch of a finger on the surface of the water. A poem makes us see, I think, more intensely and more deeply, and then to find words for that kind of paying attention. And our time in the world is so short. We better start opening our eyes and looking at it now.
Lorna, as you talk about paying attention, you've paid attention to just, well, the world writ large, to animals, to the Great Bear Rainforest, but also to things like bobby pins and salt shakers. A salt shaker is an hourglass without a waist, reminding us about how little time is left. But there are images of yours that have stayed with me for a very long time. But I love how you look at an object and it becomes a springboard for a really deep investigation that could be scientific, it could be historical, it could take you to the depths of the human heart and right up into a comet trail. It can do a lot of things.
Yeah, I think it was Raymond Carver, who is one of my favorite American writers. He
Me
wrote
too.
both short
Yeah.
stories and poetry. And he said that a writer doesn't have to be the smartest kid on the block. Thank God for that, because I'm definitely not the smartest kid on the block, especially when the block includes the University of Victoria. But a writer just has to be the kind of person that gazes at something. And it could be an earring, it could be an old shoe, it could be the antennae of a butterfly. And a writer just has to look at that with rapt attention, and a whole
Mm.
world will unfold. And everything, every emotion we have, joy, fear, grief, love, will be just part of considering that object and what it possibly means. And I think there's so much resonance in in a stone, for instance, and it's been in the world a lot longer than me, and it will be in the world long after I am gone. And so, what can I learn from its weight in my hand? What can I learn from its image in my eyes? What lessons can it teach me? I think too, moving beyond the human is always a good place to go, to look at other species and to not feel that we are the superior one, but that we can pick up knowledge from thinking about how something else, how another creature lives.
Lorna, while we've been speaking, there's been footage of the UVic writing class, and I'm curious about the first day that you go into a writing class. What do you say to your students?
Oh, I probably tell them that I'm as scared as they are. It's funny, even though I taught for years, I was always terrified about those first classes. And I would have to go for a walk in the university garden before I found my classroom building and walked into class, because here were all of these strangers who I'd never met before. And I was going to ask them to trust me and to trust what kind of knowing and what kind of unknowing I brought into the classroom. And I was going to have to ask them to be intimate with me at the same time, because writing poetry is a very intimate and revelatory process. So there's a tremendous amount of caring and at the same time challenging that has to go on, and an agreement, a contract that if you trust me with what you feel deeply about, I will trust you to be honest in your poems, and you will trust me, I hope, to help you make them better. So it's quite a contract that we have to establish with each other with this kind of teaching. It's not like teaching mathematic formulas. It's really going into the mathematics of the heart and the soul, which is a whole other, I think, delicate and vulnerable field. And the kids who go into the writing department, and excuse me for calling them kids, but they all look that way to me from my aged tower. Um, they're special people because they know they're not going to make an income from what they're doing. Maybe their parents wanted them to be dentists or study accounting, but instead they're going to learn how to be writers. And I think they're so brave and so passionate to choose this course in the first place.
I couldn't agree more. And I would say there's a reason that I interview writers and I'm not a writer myself. I'm absolutely terrified of the prospect of writing something beyond a 4-minute convocation address or a 2-minute introduction on the radio. But one of the things I have found from poetry, and this is kind of a game that I play. I have a lot of poetry. I love poetry. and I just feel that it's fed me for many, many years. But if I'm stuck for a word, I like to flip through a book and just open it up anywhere, as I've got, let's say, the blue hour of the day here, and find something that just jumps out at me and makes me think or jump higher in my thinking than I was before. And I've found having all these books to be incredibly good company. And as I look at, this is just all I can put in my hand at the moment, Lorna Crozier. That's all I can, before my couch collapses. You've written a lot. And has there ever been a time when, yeah.
I think I should be embarrassed by that pile.
Well, let's put it this way. I've also known you since 1987.
Oh my God.
I know it's kind of incredible. And so many wonderful books. But I wonder how you see your own arc, your own trajectory as a poet.
Boy, that's a tough question. I try not to think too much about, yeah, I try not to think too much about what I'm going to be doing next or what I've done. I just kind of focus on what's happening at the moment. And
Yeah.
I've been working on a nonfiction book since my husband became ill 4 years ago now. As soon as his illness started to have a profound effect on our lives, I started to write about what it felt like to live with someone whom you loved, who was sick, and who you worried you were going to lose. And to people who aren't writers, this may sound kind of cold and crass, but I forgave myself because writing is the way I know how to make it in the world. It's the only way I know how to survive, is to try to find out what it is I'm feeling and to try to articulate that in language that and words that might be read by others. It's not just a journal. It's not therapeutic for me. It's a necessity rather than a therapy. And so my writing arc, I guess, is moving not away from poetry entirely, but into another genre, but still using the tools of poetry to try to tell a story of grief and yearning and fear and also sometimes joy. The book has moments of humor in it as well. So I'm still in the process of doing the very final editing for that book. So it's kind of preoccupying me at the moment. And then when poetry comes back, I'll just go wherever the poem is taking me. And I hope that poems won't desert me. I hope when I'm 95, I'll still be writing poems. But my understanding is that poems leave you. You don't leave them. And there are stories of older writers like Phyllis Webb, for instance, the Canadian poet I admire so much, who just quit writing in her 70s and started making collages. And when she was asked why, she just said the poems weren't there anymore. So it's a blessing to have this art form that wants me right now. And I just have to trust it's going to take me where I need to go.
You mentioned your husband, the beloved Patrick Lane. And I remember the last time I did an interview with him, he said, writing novels is easy. It's writing poetry that's really hard. And I've got him on tape, or whatever we used to call tape, saying that. I know that you've written nonfiction before. You've written a memoir. You've written essays, many essays, and I don't know. I mean, what's easier, what's harder? I have no idea, but I'm interested that Patrick felt that way, and that he felt it was harder as he went on. I find doing interviews with authors harder as I go on. I think because there feels like there's so much at stake, so much more at stake.
Yeah, and I
Maybe
think
that's
as
just
well,
because, yeah,
I think we
yeah, go
realize
ahead.
as we get older that we don't know anything, you know,
Yeah.
which is, I had a lot more confidence when I was younger and was less well read, was less quotation marks wise. Now that I'm older, I mean, I know how little I know. Patrick had two sons who I'm quite close to still, who live in Victoria. And when they used to ask us for advice, we would say, don't ask us. You know, we know nothing. We don't know anything. So it makes it harder to pretend you know something, which you have to do when you're teaching, when you're giving an interview, when you're interviewing, you have to have some pretension to some expertise. And I think it becomes harder to fake it, perhaps, as we become overwhelmed by the great mysteries
Mm.
in the world. Um, and maybe we leave the world with wonder rather than with wisdom or knowledge. And maybe that's the true wisdom, is to feel wonder about everything as our lives end, rather than wise about everything. I don't
I
know.
wonder if you have a yeah, me neither, and probably won't for a while. Do you
No.
have any poetry with you that you might want to
Yeah,
read?
sure.
Great.
I talked about looking at other species with our eyes open. And so I'll read one called Frog, which comes from a book called The House the Spirit Builds. He props his chin on an orb of music, thin membraned, translucent, more mysterious than any planet. You're drawn to the pond by his song, so much bigger than his body, the size of your thumb. And you want to kiss him. Not sick of being frog, as you're often sick of being human. He'll stay the same. But what will you become? And will you miss the things he doesn't need? Your violin, your summer reading, your sleek canoe.
That's
And I'll
lovely.
maybe read I'll read one more short one, Sheila, talking about wisdom. It's called Teachings of Water. When it's halfway to being ice, water is neither. It doesn't have a body or a name. You too, frost in your hair, can be like that, anonymous and in between.
Mm. I love that, and it feels very very appropriate for our current moment, because I feel like it's an in between moment. It's some kind of liminal space that we're in right now.
Yeah. And we have to feel comfortable being there, find a way to feel
Yeah.
comfortable being there as things
Mm.
kind of disintegrate around us. What can we hang on to that has value? What can we make that has value, both spiritually and materially? I think those are important questions, at least for me. And how do we get a haircut is the other one.
Yeah, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah,
It's pretty
I know. What am I going to
crazy.
do with this?
Lorna, thank you so much. It's wonderful to talk to you. And you know what I love about your answers? So many of them are questions, and I'm going to go and think about them. Much love.
Oh, much love to you, my friend, my Chancellor. Bye bye.
Thank you, my darling. Bye bye. And thank you so very much for joining me and Lorna Crozier. What a pleasure to speak with her on Good Company. with me, Shelagh Rogers. Obviously, the good company today was fantastic. Thanks again for tuning in.